Welcome back to another episode of Comparative Council. Haffisz and Adi here. Like I promised, we're going to talk about Urban Renewal Act draft that has been tabled. First reading has been done, and in the process now coming to a second reading. There's a lot of issues around this draft, Adi. Where should we start?
I think for the benefit of the listener, I think I'll just give a very brief summary over what is this Urban Renewal Act. It was in the works for quite some time. I think this entire past year, headed by the Ministry of Local Government and Housing, YB Ngakoming, who is trying to pass a act that allows a framework where the government is able to redevelop, revitalize, and revive particular areas, especially in Kuala Lumpur urban areas, where buildings are dilapidated, in need of redevelopment. And this is what the Urban Renewal Act is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a framework that allows for that kind of redevelopment, and it has its own provisions for particular circumstances and situations with a consent threshold by the inhabitants that has to be met before any kind of redevelopment is to be taken place. And he has stressed that there's going to be a one-for-one replacement, where if, let's say, I'm the owner of a apartment unit, right, and of a building of a tower block that's going to be completely torn down, redeveloped, apparently I would get back a unit on the newly rebuilt tower block itself, right? So one-for-one replacement, saying that this is to make sure that the city is and urban structures are up to date, modernized, up to standard, and at the same time making things nicer. Of course, we like a nice, beautiful city, nice, beautiful skyline, especially for all the property owners in Kuala Lumpur, right? So I think that's just the general gist of it. There is definitely more nuances to the act, but I think we can tackle those nuances as we go through parts of the Urban Renewal Act that maybe we like or dislike. However, I think if we want to get this out of the way, Haffisz, I think I'll just say that I think this act is still not ready yet for passing in Parliament. I feel like there needs to be more time needs to be taken to amend it a bit more a few times, because at the current state that it is, I feel that there's potential for forced displacement of people, and there's going to be. I think the elephant in the room of worry here really is gentrification, right? Is that it would potentially gentrify the area, the area itself, and the value of the property, and that could be disastrous for a lot of property owners, and the potential that it could be more developer centric, where it benefits not the homeowners, the property owners, but it would mostly benefit the developers. And we know the relationship between developers and politicians and local authorities, where contracts are being passed and with the recent procurement bill at the same time being talked about in Parliament in tandem. I feel the Urban Renewal Act as it is needs a lot more work to be done. What about you, Haffisz?
Adi, in these past 7 days, there's a lot of talks by the minister themselves, government sides, even prime minister, the oppositions, civil society. They would make some press conference, and even experts by Kazana Institute researchers and whatnot, giving out their opinion on this. Mostly what I get from them, on principle, they all agree with URA, but they all differs when it comes to the fine print. So the details of it is the crux of the matter here. I think no one will say no to a urban renewal of a flat or an abandoned buildings. Of course, it's a good thing, right? But the finer details, devil is in details, right? They say. It is the battleground. So I'm gonna argue in terms of this URA bill from what are the things, the contentious point that the people actually arguing, not some just why you blindly I'm against URA because it's gonna gentrify it, or it's gonna remove Malay from the urban area, or yes, please do URA as soon as possible because I want a new flat. So just flat out yes or no wouldn't cut it. So let me go to the first one. You mentioned about threshold percentage, right? This is another thing where we have, because initially it was proposed if it's an abandoned house, 51% is needed, an agreement for the inhabitants, but if it's it's a safe building, 80% is needed. But Ngakoming, the YB responsible for this draft, has mentioned the other day that it will standardize for all property. So again, the pressure from this is from the Rakyat actually make some result towards the minister. But I think more than just we're talking about threshold should be 80%. These are all arbitrary numbers in my opinion. Just because we cannot get 100%, Adi, why 80%? Why it's not 85? Why it's not 90? So the determination of this percentage is rather useless in my point of view, because consent here should be derived from need-based analysis. So let's say if you have a development right in the middle of KL, let's say in Jalan Tun Razak, okay, infamous for traffic jam, and this is some sort of very old buildings or whatnot, maybe the needs around that area is to alleviate some of these traffic jams and whatnot, right? So maybe you want to remove from the certain kind of lane, roads or whatever. So from this, there should be a body responsible, like institution, to go for this kind of need-based for this community, and then launch an investigation and research, so that anything from the get-go, it must go through a proper channel, and it must serve the needs of that very community, not just because 80% or 70%, all these numbers. So that's number one. From the get-go, the way the government thinks is just, because we cannot get everyone, because people may have left the country or they cannot be found anymore. So an agreement is very hard to get. So we should just result to 80% or 75%. So that, I think, it's not helping in that sense. So it should be need-based, and whether this body of institution could decide, do you need a renovation or do you need a renewal, a rejuvenation kind of type? Should we demolish this building because it impedes on the road or whatever? Or should we just, it's okay, it's not impeding anything, but we should just do some renovation, just like how they did with the Rex Cinema in downtown KL. And second thing is, Adi, when you mentioned about one-to-one compensations, right? The same people argue for this, is that they're saying that, this is how it's done in Singapore and Hong Kong as well. Sure, that's part of the story, because one-on-one compensation is not enough, because you have to take into account some moving costs. You have to take account into rental while waiting for new unit costs and other stuff as well, which I can think of right now. But why we cannot compare with Hong Kong and Singapore directly? Because most of the land in Hong Kong and Singapore is owned by the government. So let's say HDB in Singapore, right? So it's a very straightforward deal with developer and the government. There is no individual owner. But in Malaysia, it's totally different case. So we have different landowners, so it's never gonna be a straightforward deal. That's why this number of 80-70% of threshold agreement make no sense to me. It could be tipped into a certain favorable in terms of developer or the government. Another thing is that we cannot compare with Hong Kong and Singapore. They take, for example, in Hong Kong, the transit-oriented development, which is, if you are a developer, not that you only responsible building up a certain area, but also the public transportation around it. So when you were awarded a contract to develop, let's say, a master development in certain area, let's say in Sim Sasoi, for example, it's then you have to connect Sim Sasoi with the rest of Hong Kong. How? MRT. And MRT, as we know in Hong Kong, is very efficient. Why? Because it's most of them are privately funded. Whoever wants to build a condo in that particular area, they have to build the station for MRT as well. They are responsible for that. So it's not the case in Malaysia, because in Malaysia it's insane. The government use public money to boost the price or the value of certain area because there's MRT stations there. So that's public risk. But those who benefit from this evaluation, high evaluation, is the developer, because all they have to do right now, buy that land next to the station and build the condo and say, look, we have the best connectivity to the MRT. You should buy our condominium at a premium price. See, the profit goes to the private. So public risk, but private profit. This is, I think, one of the biggest threat we are looking at when we are rushing this URA draft bill. Just very quickly, Adi, before I let you, is number 3, is the transparency of the intentions. Look, most of the people who actually inhabitants of all these flats or low-cost housings, their worries is that they're going to get kicked out, and the new units that they will get, either 101 replacement, whatnot, is the cost after it, the maintenance, because it's brand new, right? Of course, we're going to factor in on all this thing. But the developer should be transparent on the business model on how they're going to do it. Because let's say they take a flat with 100 units, just for example, right? With a specification of a size of land. If they are going to demolish and rebuild into a 500 unit, means those 400 units, the difference is the profit. They should be transparent about it, what they plan about it, and tell the people, look, we're going to make this certain much of money, we're going to build this and this. We're going to make, according to our projection, if this completion in, let's say, 2030, we're going to get this much of money. Be transparent about it, and then share some of that profit with the people, the inhabitants of that place in the first place. Because coming, frank with this, with nothing hiding behind your sleeve, is the best way to convince the inhabitants. Otherwise, all the secrecy, shadow, using some kind of arguments that it should be done because, oh, look at that flat, it's ugly, it's hideous, it's smelly, won't cut it. It's just what? All you want to do is, all that you care is aesthetic? That doesn't make sense. You want to do that to every single all building in KL? That's even insane.
Wow, Haffisz, I think you cover a lot of great points here and there when it comes to the consolidation of public interest in this is very important, right? Making sure that the public is consulted, making sure that the homeowners, the people who are your work we're doing, the whole point of the act is to service the urban communities, right? Is to make it so that their place is nicer, so that we can revitalize the urban centers to make it more attractive for people, right? But like you said, there's so many gaps when it comes to the one-to-one compensation, right? Because when we redevelop, the value goes up, right? Property value goes up. When the property value goes up, there comes a lot of caveats like taxation, like you said, other kinds of smaller costs as well that will be incurred on the homeowner. So let's say we're going to redevelop a building in a not so affluent neighborhood, right? People are just barely getting by, barely paying rent, right? Suddenly they get a one-to-one compensation. The place that they own jumped spikes in value, right? Very good, can sell it back, right? But at the same time, if what happens, they don't want to sell, right? What if the ones want to keep? But then the taxation for it is, the tax rate is increased, right? It's bumped up because your value bumped up. But the thing is your financial capacity commensurate with that increase in tax rate, right? I'm sure there's more technical details to it, but that's one of the arguments that I've noticed as well. I've seen is that property value would continue to go. And that is why, going back to the idea of gentrification, is that the value will go up. People cannot be able to afford. Regular people cannot be able to afford, right? So that is one thing that needs to be considered here. Is that when it comes to this one-to-one, right, compensation, uh, will there be incentives for the property owners at a specified time, right? Now, that's one thing. The second thing I do want to touch upon is what concerns me here is that if you look at part 3 of the Urban Renewal Act, talks about apa ni, administration. Okay, and this is talking about the governance of the Urban Renewal Act. So it states that there will be established a federal executive committee. At the state level, there'll be a state executive committee, right? But however, at the state level, the issue I have here is that this committee is appointed at the discretion of the Menteri Besar and the Chief Minister. So this gives a lot of executive oversight over the urban renewal, any type of urban renewal initiatives, right? It is very much state-centric. And you know how I don't like it when there's too much power concentrated and consolidated at a particular place, right? The committee, what is it made up of? It's made up of a lot of executive governance levers, right? There's no mention on people who, let's say, are town planners. There's no mention of people who are active in the communities, like, let's say, I don't know, homeowners association. There's no involvement of, let's say, even legal people, right? Like I know, I think there was a BFM talk about this. You can appoint these kinds of people, like retired judges, the best interest of the people within the committee. I know the committee can set up another body to help with the process, but at the same time, there's the lack of representation from these urban communities to be part of it, right? And that is where we see, let's say, other cases like in Korea, which is very community-centric, community-driven centric, is that the people have more weight to what they say with what they want, right? We're talking about consent, right? Consent, I feel like you said, it's very arbitrary, right? But sometimes consent can shift. Sometimes I consent at one point, but sometimes I can take it back, right? Or someone needs to be convinced to give their consent, right? How do you give that? Is you have to make sure you convince them by involving them in the process, right? Okay, what is going to be happening here? This committee, does it really have the best interest of the people that will be affected in mind, right? So there needs to be more variety in the governance itself, and I feel that is the way to go when it comes to more high level development, right? I think this whole idea of state centric, state led is very outdated. It's very not fit for purpose. More dynamic and more in especially urban areas where people are more professional, right? There's more, you can find easier body of professional people who know the professional standards as well. People who are more in corporate sectors who do have that level of understanding that can articulate, right? So you can draw upon a lot of these people to help enhance and stack up the committee to be more dynamic, right? To be more ready so that it can really truly represent the urban development that we would like to see, right? So this thing needs to be talked at, but of course, I know that Parliament and even like at the state level, they're always they're scared of these kinds of commitments of decentralizing powers or power sharing with people who are not within the governance or even the executive, beyond the executive sphere, right? The executive spectrum. So this is a chance, because when it comes at the end of the day, right? When we talk about urban centers, right? When we think of urban centers, we don't think necessarily about the city councils. We don't necessarily think about the government part of it, the government side of it. What we think straight away when we think about urban centers, we think about the people that inhabit it. We think about the buildings that are being built there. We think about the types of, the vibrancy of a city is only equal to the vibrancy of the people that inhabit that kind of city, right? It's why when we look towards like more, nicer, cities that we like to emulate, let's say, I don't know, New York, London in the West, right? Or even like Tokyo or Seoul, right? Is because there is a vibrant community of people of different kinds of demographics, young, old, very people who things are on the move, right? Things are always bustling, things are on the move, and there's a lot of energy to be going around. So you need to tap into that. That is what we think of cities, right? We don't think of government does what the government does for that city. It's how the people itself. So it needs to really be more people centric and people led, and maybe then you can introduce the idea of a consent threshold, right?
When we the government of the PH 1.0 revoked the GST in 2018, PH come into a collective statement where they say GST should be removed because the people is not ready to be burdened with this kind of a regressive tax system, and until we as a Malaysian reach a certain kind of standard of living and minimum wage. Using that same analogy, Eddie, this euro should be put on hold first until there's certain sets of standard in terms of maintaining all these low cost housing and other flats or abandoned buildings take place before we do this. Here's what I mean. Why is it in the first place that these places, after 30 years, 40 years, they look so run down? Some of them, it's not safe to be used anymore, or some of them already abandoned. Why? There should be a research into this and go into the root cause. Maybe it's poor maintenance, sure. Culture of maintenance, it's not just in public relation, it's even in government sectors and whatnot, sure. Or maybe it's the shady workmanship to begin with. So when the government in Eura wants to make it able for them to renew, to enforce Eura every 30 years, it's actually incentivize the developer to produce poor workmanship, because they know this building will be renewed again in 30 years. So what they're going to end up with, okay, I'm going to cut costs, make the cheapest building that just good enough to last for 30 years. Because after 30 years, my same company can apply for another grant to renew the same building. That would be a nightmare to those who live in that area. And if Eura passes the House of Commons, and it's still like this, 30 years allows them to renew or redevelop the place, the developer will be laughing all the way to the bank, thinking, hey, I can make so much money out of this, because every 30 years I'll have a new big mega projects, because I know I can cut costs in it and no one can stop me from doing it. So that's one of the biggest worry also for this to go through. And like I mentioned, if you want to put Eura, sure, but make sure the culture of maintenance is there. There's some sort of a mechanism, a proper mechanism, so that everyone will pay their share, so that maintenance of the building will be, will be upkeep properly. Because just like, again, we're going to mention Singapore here. In Singapore, they're going to deduct some money from your EPF, in your CPF in Singapore instead. CPF to deduct to maintain your HDB flats. Maybe it should be done the same way in Malaysia. So if you one of these owners of low-cost housing, whatever, and you are working and have EPF, some of your money should be used to maintain that building, because, hey, you want this for the rest of your life, right? So when you're old, you want to have a roof to stay in, right? So you should use some of this money to maintain your building as well. So maybe that should be done before we go to Urban Renewal Act, because otherwise, like you mentioned, it is why a rush in this? Adi, I think we talked at length about this. What's your final words about this?
I think to the Indian government, intentions are good. I definitely understand the whole point of why it is, right? On paper, it makes sense, right? A lot of urban centers do need a lot of rejuvenation, need a lot of revitalization, right? But I think it has to be going back to the drawing board. Probably table it again with the improvements. There's a lot of feedback brought out about this, right? Listen to that and take that into consideration. Go back, the ministry, get ready for another 3-4 months of hunkering down, make any amendments, come back to another parliament session, right? Sit down and then talk about it. There's no use of being so blasé or so quick to push anything, right? This unity government still has quite a bit of time before the election, right, to pass this Urban Renewal Act and all kinds of other parliamentary reforms that they want to make, right? Reforms in parliament. So, I mean, go back, listen to the stakeholders, listen to the people, their concerns, right? Because this is something that's quite delicate as well, because it does deal with urban centers, which does generate a tremendous amount of economic activity, and a lot of people do flock to urban centers for jobs and as a way to improve their livelihood. So this needs to be managed with a lot of delicately, as mentioned, delicately. And needs to be done properly before it can be fit for purpose, right? Before it can have the proper framework that does involve as many voices as it can, right? The parliament is not there to advance laws of its own interest, it's there to advance laws in the interest of the people, right? That's what the point of parliament is. That's what we call it, Dewan Rakyat, right? Rakyat is still the prime denominator here. So, I guess still congratulations to the Minister Ngah Koming for presenting this. It's still a good step, but I think more needs to be done. Go back to the drawing board, re-strategize, have a rethink, come back, see how it goes. Maybe another round of amendments. It's okay. Take your time with this, right? There's no rush to push this so soon.
I mean, the second reading is scheduled in October, the next parliamentary session. So hopefully within this full month of September, they're going to come up with something more inspiring rather than just try to bulldoze their way into passing through this bill. I think that's it about Urban Renewal Act 2025 draft. Next up, what are we going to talk about, Adi? Do you have any clue?
We should have said this on the first episode because we have passed a very important milestone for Malaysia, Malaya and Sabah. So I think before it says anything, Selamat Hari Merdeka to our friends in Malaya and Selamat Hari Sabah to all our fellow Sabahans out there. So that is going to be the topic for the next episode. Stay tuned for that.
Always go back to Sabah. See you in the next episode.